Hey, good morning, everyone, and welcome to our online webinar, The Future of Work Beyond 2020 in an Age of Disruption. My name is Sarah Havenden, and I'm the Marketing Communications Manager at UKZN Extended Learning, also known as UEL. So in case you're unfamiliar with UEL, we are the continuing education unit of the University of KwaZulu-Natal, and we offer all the short courses on behalf of the university. Please note that due to the nature of this webinar, we will not be able to address raised hands and questions throughout the presentation. So please would you post all comments and questions in the Q&A box, and these will be addressed at the end of the webinar. We will also allow for live questions at the end, so you can just raise your hand and ask your question live if you have one to ask. I'd now like to introduce you to our guest speaker for today, Professor Abdullah Kader. So Abdullah is a Senior Manager of Learning and Development, RBB, Retail and Business Banking within Nedbank Integrated Channels KZN. His primary responsibility is to partner with business and ensure that staff are competent to perform at optimal levels. His corporate experience has exposed him to the complexity of managing the duality of revenue growth and cost efficiency, and ensuring that execution and measurements of success, both to clients, staff, shareholders, and the organization, are effective and measurable. Professor Kader is an adjunct lecturer at UKZN, where he teaches on advanced topics and managing strategic change. He is also a research fellow at UJ, where he also serves on the board of engineering and the built-up environment. He also lectures strategy, entrepreneurship, and research at other universities. So welcome, Abdul, and over to you.
Thank you very much. It's great to be here, guys, and hope you all can hear me loud and clear. And it's great to engage you this morning, and I'm looking forward to the engagement. I think this topic that we are going to discover this morning and talk about is very wide and very varied in the fact that I would like to take you through a journey right now. And the journey that I want to probably take you through is through the advent of the fourth industrial revolution, bringing you down from a global perspective to that from a South African perspective in terms of where we are from an Africa and South African perspective, and then moving on to the future of work beyond 2020. So ladies and gentlemen, it's having explored this topic myself and engaging various thought leaders on this topic and reading articles on AI and robotics and economics. And the conclusion is very simple. The future of work is already here, and we all have to deal with it. Now, when I Googled the word, the future of work, and the phrase itself appeared about 48 million times on Google. And then all of a sudden, there's hundreds of books and articles on the topic covering everything from artificial intelligence to robotics, to income inequality. And as you know, we're moving into a contingent labor type environment. And the reason is very simple. We're here in an economic cycle where jobs as we know them are rapidly changing. In fact, I would venture to say that we are reaching a time when jobs as we know them would be not the same, or probably going away with the jobs that you're currently doing. Yes.
Your presentation is off the screen. I don't know if that was intentional.
Can you see it now?
No, if you can just share it again.
Okay, let me just share it again for you quickly. Okay. Sorry about that. Let me just quickly. Can you see that? Can you see
Not
that?
Yet. Not yet.
Can you? Not yet.
Yeah.
Okay. Can
yeah,
you see that now?
Yep, it's up. If you can just do slideshow.
Yeah. Can you see that?
Yes, all good to go.
Oh, thank you. Sorry about that. So when we start talking about the future of work, and just to reinforce that the phrase itself, the future of work, has been and is being branded around at quite an extensive rate. And technology, as you know, is starting to automate at a very, very unprecedented rate. We're talking about artificial intelligence, we're talking about sensors, we're talking about robotics. All of these things are becoming mainstream. And the structure of organizations is changing. And it's changing companies so that when engaging CHROs and CEOs of companies, they believe that the structure has to be flattened to such extent to make jobs more dynamic and further leverage of the contingent or the contract labor that we're going forward. The question of inequality in terms of has become a very major political debate, and the underlying problem is lying with that of policymakers and how business evolves, how labor evolves. This is going to simply become a big idea in terms of the fact that jobs, as we know it in terms of its title and in terms of its level, in terms of its job description, will be replaced, and people will be hired to do work, to get a project done, and lead a team that will be moving on very, very quickly. So I'm going to talk about these things very, very quickly. And I'm going to just speak about, as you know, and you can see there, I'll be talking about from a global perspective, what's happening across the world. I'll be talking about Africa, and you see when we talk about Africa, and then South Africa, and then no conversation is without the COVID conversation. And the COVID conversation, as we know, has been like Mike Tyson usually say, everybody has a plan until you get punched in the mouth. And that's exactly what happened from a South African perspective and the world perspective. And then the Great Reset happened. And then now comes the new world of work. New world of work, new jobs, remote work. And what are some of the roles? And I'm going to share with you some of the roles as per NEDLAC. What are they thinking about? What are some of the research that has happened in that particular space? Very quickly, the fourth industrial revolution, as we know it, is more than just technology. According to the World Economic Forum, it's an opportunity to help everybody and to harness and to cover and coverage of technologies to create an all-inclusive, human-centered future. Now, why am I saying all of these things? You will see that when it downplays and outplays and it tease it out for you from a global perspective coming down, you can see that the revolution that's taking place and the evolutions that are taking place across the globe, what is going to happen with the future of jobs beyond 2020 itself. Now, as you know, that you're all very familiar with these particular slides, where the first industrial revolution, and that happened sometimes in Britain, and it was opposed by the Luddites at that time. It was opposed by them because they believed it was taking away the jobs, but the technology continued to march on. And the second aspect, when the second industrial revolution came into being, it was characterized by the scientific revolution, whereby unified electrical and magnetic forces were being that gave us electricity and electric motor, and these ushered in at that era a mass production. And then when we looked at the third industrial revolution, it was characterized by semiconductors, which gave us transistors and and the electronic age. And then the fourth industrial revolution, as we know it to be, we start talking about where the merging of digital technologies, physical and biological systems, all of those things into one. So when we start to look at what are the top skills, according to the World Economic Forum, we start to look at the top skills in 2020. We're looking at complex and problem solving. We're looking at critical skills. We're looking at creativity. We're looking at people management and all of those things that we're talking about that have shifted our process, our thought process in terms of where we are going to be from a 2020 perspective. But here again, according to a Hans Movarak, he would call it the Movarak's dilemma. He says that the first three industrial revolutions, as we've seen it, created massive jobs due to the jobs that drove urbanization. But the fourth industrial revolution will make human beings irrelevant. Then what will happen to the jobs in the fourth industrial revolution? We will still have to, will we still have conventional jobs in this particular era? And that's the conversation that we need to have. And then Movarak describes it very nicely. And for this, we get an insight into Hans Movarak's dilemma, where he says he came up with what is known as the Movarak's dilemma as we see it there, that states that the level of difficulty it takes to automate a task on how long humans have been performing that particular task. So what is the level of difficulty it will take to automate that particular task. And he gives an example that says that as human beings, we've been kind to each other for tens of thousands of years. Therefore, it will be incredibly difficult to automate kindness. So that's according to Hans Moverex when he started to talk about the future of jobs in terms of the soft skills as we know it in industry today, or the power skills as some might call it. Another example is that human beings have been writing for 6,000 years as we know it. So it's easier to automate writing than kindness. In fact, due to the ease of getting a computer to read, as well as check spelling and grammar, companies no longer employ people to do that because Microsoft Word is now performing these particular tasks. So what Moverak has taught us is that when it comes to intelligent machines taking over jobs, white collar workers will be affected more than blue collar workers. So if anybody doubts this, try to find a robot that can prune the trees in your garden. So that's one of the aspects that we start to look at. So moving on, we start to look at then what are then the consequences? What are then the consequences of the fourth industrial revolution? And we know that there's a post-era work due to advanced means of production. We know about increased inequality. We know about bonded freedom. And I'm not going to go through every one of them, which you can see. We start to look at bonded nationalism, new economic theories. So what is this? What does this mean for us? And how do we look at this particular, and what context we have to look at them? Given all these problems, what then needs to be done? First, we need to look at legislation and how we regulate technology to the fourth industrial revolution. And that is to protect our citizens and to protect the data that comes out of it. Secondly, we need to create systems that will incentivize the collection and ownership of the data itself. Thirdly, we need to educate. And I think this particular seminar, as a broad context, give you an education perspective. And the way education system, having chatted to the deputy chair of the fourth industrial revolution, he's of the view that kids should not at primary, at very low level, should not be learning coding, should not be learning technology to a large extent. The reason is very simple. He says that they should be learning three things only. One is to learn English, because all engineering language is programmed and written in English. Secondly, he believes that it should be all kids should have mathematical knowledge, should be taught great mathematics at a very early level, at a very early age. And the third thing that he said that he should be looking at is to start looking at how can they become people that have, or kids that have a sense of logical reasoning and what is logic means to them. So we need to start looking at these particular consequences. We need to start finding out how best we can mitigate the risk in these particular consequences that we see from a 4IR. And obviously it starts from a government perspective. And we start to look at the legislations, we start to look at the systems, we start to look at the remaining jobs, and how do we understand them in terms of the importance, and how do we start to look at multidisciplinary educational system that we look at. So let's further look at when we say that there are three forces that are shaping the future of work. There are three forces that are shaping the future of work. One is by 2020, global access to markets and talents will reshape the businesses, globalization. And we know that we're working in an era of connectivity. We're working in an era where businesses become very, very small. And in terms of globalization, I like what Jack Ma once said. He said, you worry about three 30s, 30, 30, and 30. He says, worry about the 30-year-old, because the 30-year-old grew up in the age of technology and knew nothing else. Then the second thing he said was worry about organizations that have less than 30 people that work for them. Why? Because the agility of those organizations, the manner in which they can maneuver, the manner in which they can close one in one environment and open without having great consequences for the people because of the number that they have and the nimbleness that they come from, it's easy for them to transform into something else. And the third 30, he says, for the next 30 years, technology will consume you, and best you understand it very, very well. And let's look at the second point in terms of demographics, and we start to look at the 5 generations working for each other. I come from a financial services industry as well. I've been there for many years, and I have been working in terms of finding out how can we move that particular industry into the futuristic space. And when we start to unpack strategies and we start to unpack technologies, we think that the 5 generations, all of them need to be communicated, need to be advised, and need to be informed in a particular manner, which is generic across all 5. But unfortunately, that's not the case. We have 5 different generations that work each other, all of which needs different types of communication, all of which different understandings, and all of them would be in different spaces. So it's understandable that we need to communicate as per the centricity or the people that we're looking at. And the last point in this particular aspect, you start to look at social media will connect employees, and we see that. I mean, many of you in this webinar right now are probably connecting in various devices, and we'll unpack those devices very, very shortly. But you have the option, you have the opportunity, you have the know-how to actually connect via the different devices, via different platforms, and engage with the communities, engage with whichever you want to engage in those particular spaces when we start to look at those aspects of engagement. So let's start to look at some of the rapidly growing technologies of the fourth industrial revolution. It might not be new news to all of you, but it's best that we revisit some of them so that we get an understanding of the type of technologies that are growing in this particular environment. We have artificial intelligence, we have big data analytics, we have machine learning, we have robotics, quantum computing, biotechnology. There is a single thread that runs across all of them. And the single thread that runs across all of them is none other than data. Now, how you engage data, how you consume data, what data you consume, how you do that has become one of the big talking points from a employment point of view, from an industry point of view, and do people understand the concept of big data and big data analytics? What insights are they getting from the data, and how then they can position their organization, how then they can position their people to move on to making projections and growth in particular markets that they wanting to engage in or wanting to be in. So it's important for us to understand, as much as we have all of these technologies and we have all of this intelligence that sit with us, the issue is that what type of data do we get and what insights that I see. I'm beginning to see the big data space, and I'm just telling the marketing person very earlier on in this conversation prior to you guys coming on. I've been seeing that when I've just jumped off another webinar that we talked about big data and big data analytics, and the insights into the big data analytics is important. And then when we start to unpack this in the from a country perspective, from the global perspective, we'll understand where we're going with this. So let's very quickly look at the global perspective, and I want to start to you. As we know, Germany, I think it was the Hanover Fair in 2011 that spoke about Industry 4.0. And it was purely from a manufacturing point of view. I think the person that coined that phrase earlier on was a guy called Professor Wolfgang Wolscher that coined the phrase of Industry 4.0, subsequently taken to the World Economic Forum and saying, hang on, guys, you guys are merely talking about a particular sector, you're talking about manufacturing. Can we not take it and make it bigger than what we see? So we start to look at that particular perspective. And what did Germany do at that point in time? They start to look at digital manufacturing as their competitive trust. The enablers were the public-private partnership, and they start to look at, from an industrialization point of view, superior and efficient marketing. When we start to look for a look at India, and India had coined the AI for all. That has been the strategic name given to their concept, the 4IR, and how they're going to drive technology. They start to look at, they wanted to become, and they are becoming, the technological hub technology leadership for inclusive growth. And they want to be the CERN. If you know the CERN, it is your nuclear research. They want to be the CERN for AI, for artificial intelligence. So that's the shift that that particular country, India, is trying to look at. From a Japan point of view, they call it Society 5.0. As you know, the demographics of Japan in terms of its the age in Japan and the youngsters that are coming through, they start to look at the social challenges and how they can manage that through the 4IR technologies, and they have a desire to become a technology priority and the deployment. So you start to look at Japan in that particular phase. From a Malaysia point of view, they played around with a couple of words. As you can see, they start to look at industry forward and what they try to look at digital transformation. And from an enabler point of view, you can see that they look at small, medium, micro enterprises and that type of development they're looking at there. Singapore looked at smart nations, and they start to look at the industrialized from a service delivery point of view. And they had a clear centralized industrial policy from that perspective. United Kingdom, however, was slightly different. They say that we've got all these technologies, and they started to look at the ethics of the technologies, the ethics of the data, the ethics. So they looked at the ethical component, and they started to move the trust. And where their enablers, they have seen their enablers has been in terms of the private public sector deals, the venture capital, and the productivity and growth and so forth. United Arab Emirates, as you know, guys, wants to be, if you go to Dubai, if you see the adverts coming out of Dubai, they want to be the industrial hub. They want to be the technology hub of the fourth industrial revolution. And that's their main aim. And they bring everybody on board. They start to advertise. They start to bring the best thought leaders across the world. And the reason is very simple. They have a problem. They have a problem with regard to water. Water is a scarcity, and they're wanting to use technology in order to manage that for them. And they become and strangely enough, they want to become the world's open lab for autonomous and sustainable mobility. And you know, Dubai, and as you see from a Dubai perspective, this is specifically what's going on in that particular space. From an Africa perspective, I think you will understand from an Africa perspective that number slightly it's gone up since that 2018. We're looking at technology, and one can single out in the Africa perspective Rwanda as the technological forerunner for that space. And as you know, that they use drones to deliver medicines to people who are living in the far-flung rural areas. Ghana is another country to look out for in the fourth industrial revolution, where you know that Google is investing in around 1 billion in that country to build an artificial intelligence research laboratory, which will develop technological solutions in healthcare and agriculture itself. That's specifically from an Africa perspective. And when we start to look at Africa, we start to look at the ethics around it, the legislation, the governance around it, and all of those things come into play from that particular perspective. One could also bring Kenya in the mix, and we're seeing Kenya being also moving in that particular direction in terms of wanting to become the leaders in Africa itself. Let's come back to from a South African perspective. The government has long talked about plans to embrace 4IR. I think we adopted 4IR, I think in 2018, late 2018 or so. And they had 8 strategies towards that, according to the policy document, according to the 4IR Commission, where Prof. Telitsa Marawala is the deputy chair. And you start to look at the type of things that they're wanting to bring on board. And we start to look at preparation through experimentation. We start to look at human capital development. We start to look at the clarity with regard to technology. And importantly for us as well is an issue of service delivery. Also, if you're looking at South Africa, you start to look at South Africa education system needs needs an overhaul, basically in terms of the type of education we bring on board, the type of curriculum that people will need to be learning, and even adult education, which was primarily maybe used for reading and writing, has now had to transform into something else so that we can start to get to it uh, even more efficiently. Also, we look at one particular province, and we look at Cape Town, and we look at the innovation hubs in Cape Town, the businesses involvement, the small medium enterprises involvement in Cape Town, which is that area, as you would know or don't know, is colloquially known as Silicon Cape, which is a reference to the Silicon Valley in San Francisco. So I am going back from my dimensions, 8 dimension. There is a document out right now in terms of the recommendations to this particular stuff, where we are from that particular perspective. So just to give you context from a South African perspective, where we are and what we're currently doing. And obviously what we're looking at, we're starting to look at global leadership that sits in the middle of this dimensions that we're talking about. Now, can we as South African economy, can we withstand this particular fourth industrial revolution with the technology, with the advent of jobs, with the advent of new aspects, new knowledge coming to the fore? Can we manage them? We've seen the shrinking of our economy in that space, and we all know the financial crisis of 2008, 2009, and then we've subsequently seen there's been an uptake in 2010, and one could attribute that to the World Cup, but notwithstanding, it could be a propped up economy at that point of view. But these are generally from a South African economy point of view. We are trying to implement and embed the technologies. I am speaking from that. I brought you from a perspective of a global to Africa to South African perspective, simply because to show you the revolution, to show you the evolution that's taking place over a period of time that is pushing us. This is now not even at a point where I'm going to get to where it has been a COVID environment. And that's a discussion we're going to have just now. But there has been moves afoot with regard to pushing our boundaries so that we can start to get to and start to play with the rest of the world, from moving into the jobs of the future, the technologies of the future, and moving into areas that we were taking a period of time to do that. And then we start to look at how our economy, and some say in 2020, we're starting to look at a 1.5% GDP growth at that point in time. So from a South African economy point of view, just have a look at the access of electricity, notwithstanding our challenges in Eskom, with load shedding, with the aging of infrastructure, with the bloated um, um, what you call staffing that we probably have, or whatever you want to call it, that South Africa has over the last 18, 20 years has made great progress, and made great progress almost 90%, as you can see, 86, 90% over the last couple of years, short of 2020, has been electrified. So a large number of South Africans have got access to electricity. So which is a positive trend that we see in this particular case. When it comes to the internet access, and we start to look at from a South African perspective, out of a total, although this data is a bit old, and it's a 2014 data, and we can start to look at that a little bit more in its current trend. We're looking at a population of 48 million at that point in time, 73% of which were at mobile subscriptions, of which smartphone percentage were 31%, which is, if you see the blue line and you see the orange line, you see that particular line, you see that we are better than the global average that we sit at. So what is it telling you? It's basically telling you that if you're trying to put any interventions in play, if you're trying to upskill, reskill, or outskill individuals in that particular era, if you're trying to look at interventions so that you want to move and start to give people new skills in a particular domain, in a particular discipline, you will start to look at engaging individuals by way of these particular instruments, as we call them. And this is just a more recent study in 2018 that start to look at the digital reach in the South African context, the number of active internet users, and we can see that laptop and desktop. We can look at year-on-year change, and we start to look at mobile phones, and that's because of other devices that we start. There's a decrease in that particular, and the other devices, we start to look at that particular perspective from a digital connotation. Then I've taken you through that, and then came this particular pandemic. And then particular pandemic had a reset, in total reset. And what was a total reset? And we start to look at where our readiness from a health system at level 5, we were low. And then as we subsequently moved on to the 21st of September at level 1, it was basically at a high level. So it showed that we had the capability and capacity to move at the time when we were hit with the pandemic at level, and put the country in March sometimes at level 5. I've just come back from a conference in the very last flight, but by the way, with the individuals that were here, I've come back from a conference overseas when level 5 just came into being, one of the last flights that came into Durban at that point in time. And I was on there, and I can tell you there was pandemonium, there was panic. I myself didn't know what was going on in terms of that. So that uneasiness that was there at that point in time, had been relieved through the period in terms of the South Africa's readiness in terms of managing this particular pandemic. And we see from that, and there's a slightly old data that we see here. It was at that point 729,000, and of 19,000 at that point in time. That's a recovery in that perspective. The reason for this particular slide is to show you that although this movement was going on, there was things afoot to move towards working differently, remotely, working from a technology environment, working to upskill and reskill. And that transition over the period of time that I've taken you has exacerbated the fact that now we've been hit with the COVID-19. And as we know, 93% of the world's workers resided in countries with some form of workplace closure, and that was purely done to prevent the spread of coronavirus when we start to look at that particular perspective. So in response to that, what did business do? 84%, as we know, accelerated the digital workspace. Now, if 84% accelerated the digitization of processes, did we have the capacity? Did we have the know-how? Did we have the skills? So those are some of the things that we looked at. And a lot of them provided more opportunities to work remotely. Now, the advent of working remotely is not taking your work online and calling it remote, because that's not remote work. There are a whole lot of disciplines around remote work that is being challenged at this point in time, that are looking at, and there's a whole lot of other issues that are coming out from the remote setting if it's not in any way being handled in a manner that it should be handled. And then we start to look at the accelerating of automated tasks. 50% of them responded adequately. Accelerated of digitized upskilling education. You know it if you come from an institution like UEL. The guys have done phenomenally well to move the entire sessions onto an online platform with engagement with either Teams or Zoom meetings and Zoom sessions. This has been done adequately to mitigate the risk in terms of not losing that particular education year, as you may call it. And then we can see 35% of them only looked at from an acceleration point of view to implement an upskilling and reskilling programs, and then ongoing organizational transformation and restructuring that are taking place as we see it now. An economist was once asked, and I'm subject to correction. He says, just in one word, describe what economy is to you, and he called it very simply incentives. He says you've got to incentivize people so that it creates manufacturing and productivity. So it creates a buyer and a seller, so that it creates the use of technology. So you've got to incentivize. And how you incentivize is left entirely to you, either by free trade zones, either by incentive packages, either by looking at rebates, and the whole host of things that one could look at from an incentivization point of view. If you look at Xi Jinping, when he looked at the Shenzhen province, and it was a very fishery environment, and how he created and incentivized that particular hub to become a hub in that particular country itself. So we start to incentivize people and start to look at things a little bit differently. So at that point in time, then post-COVID, when we start to look at post-COVID, how do you invest in human capital? What was one of the recommendations from the Commission of the Fourth Industrial Revolution? Establish an AI institute. I think there are certain sites around the country that have been looked at for that particular perspective. Secure, avail data for innovation, build 4IR infrastructure. I think that's one of the main aims of this particular environment, and establish a 4IR strategy that we're looking at. So then takes you to the fact of when we start to look at, there are 5 imperatives for resetting the future of work agenda. 1, you got work, you have the workers, and you have the workplace. So when we start to look at work, with increasing robotics, cognitive and AI technologies, what work can be done by and with machines? So that is challenging at the moment for us. That's the first thing. The workers, and we start to look at the workers. What will the worker of the future look like? What will his skill be? What will his capability be? What will be his capacity? And what is that particular individual look at? And then workplace. Work is not somewhere where you go to. Work will be everywhere. So it's important to understand that particular perspective. And then we start to look at what then has been transforming this organization that we start to look at. Let's go back there. We start to look at the transformation, the alignment, the building of the human capacity and centric culture. And that is a critical part when we start to look at cultivating a, a health and well-being. And we start to look at that. So transforming organization design, we start to empower an agile and distributed workforce, which is complex, which is multi-layered, which is a matrix, to a very networked structure. And that's what we're looking at from an organizational design perspective. We will need to explore hybrid working options, expand talent base beyond traditional sources. I think GE looked at this beautifully when they had an issue with regard to reducing the weight on the aeroplane, and they went out to the world and they said to everybody, this is our problem. We want to reduce efficiency, fuel. We want to drop the cost. What did they do? They went out to the world. So the talent base, expanded talent base, is you might have the talent in your organization, but understand it is limited to your particular environment, and it's not expounded and exposed to such an extent where you'll get ideas or where you will get talent or solutions that might be beyond the traditional sources that you're looking at. So those are some of the things that when you look at from an organization design perspective. And when you start to design the work, we start to look at how do you pivot to remote working, and what does remote working look for you? What are the new tools that we need to look at? How do you clarify work? And what does that look like for you? What are the policies you put in place? How do you foster engagement? How do you look at mental health, which is becoming an issue because of isolation and all of those things that we see right now? And then how do you provide equipment for working from home? And redesigning the workspace, the role of the office space, we know that has been an item on the agenda for many organizations. They had footprint across the country. We start to look at the total office space. We start to look at how they can look at additional revenue streams in that particular space. Are they essential? That's the question that you need to ask. And how do you remodel for creative and activity-based work? So And how do we align our new technologies and embrace technology from a business transformation point of view? 80% of our global employees have accelerated the digitization of workplace. Technology is going to be a key enabler for businesses and your digital guides to educate people across the organizations itself. So how do we align the new technologies and skills that we're looking at? How do we integrate reskilling and upskilling? What is the current workforce need? And how do you become lifelong learning cultures? You know, there's an interesting conversation that has taken place with Josh Bershon not so long ago, and he he talks about the fact that although we're going to be globally losing 75 million jobs, we will be adopting and creating 133 million jobs. And he says that 42% of everything that you know today will be obsolete. So what needs to happen, and he talks about 101-day reskilling or upskilling phenomena, that you need 101 training days to be reskilled and upskilled in that particular space. And yeah, we start to look at, so if you, why am I labeling the point? If you feel that technology is going to be taking away your job, and if you feel it's not going to be taking away a job, it's left entirely to you, simply because you will be able, if you are able to continuously learn, because the average lifespan of a skill that you have, or the skill that you'll be required to have in organization, will be 18 months. So you'll have an average lifespan of the particular skill of 18 months for that particular job, which will be transformed. Then you would need to continuously upskill and reskill yourself. This is also very, very important in the era that we are in now, physical, mental, and financial well-being. And we know what happened from that particular perspective. We know our safe return to the office itself. What does that mean? And what organizations are going through. And the people that are going back to the offices at this point in time, what is they feeling, and how do you integrate them back if you wanted to integrate them and you can't do without them working remotely? Building a human-centric leadership culture, I think it's important that we need to look at how we improve our communication. And this is important for us building. You know, you had a manager that you felt that was sitting at the office with you, very humane, stood over your shoulder, patted you on the back, and gave you compliments. Now, all of a sudden, that same manager that you have, the same leader that you have, has become a person that wants a half-time score, a full-time score, and he's like micromanaging you. So that's duality that we're looking at, the shift that we're looking at. How do we empower our local leaders to improve our communication, improve our interaction, to ensure that even if you're working remotely, that you can do that in a very amiable and humane manner. And then we're also looking at how do you enhance and enable human connection from that particular perspective. So that brings me to the point that we are moving, and part of what we're going to be moving into, we're going to be moving into a remote and into a virtual space. And most of you have moved into a virtual space. And some of the concerns that you see here are very valid, that in terms of the virtual space. You know, lack of real-time collaboration. I have to send you I have to send you a little note, or, you know, and it takes time. Maybe you engaged in another team meeting or another Zoom meeting, and you'll respond later. Where you worked across the desk from me, I just walked across, placed a little sticky note on your desk and say, just see me for 10 seconds. I need to chat to you about something. So real-time collaboration has become an issue. The other issue is that there is a misplaced, from a concern point of view, is that issue of confidentiality. You know, I've heard of colleagues saying that sometimes they're working in the same environment as their wife or their husband, and they are having different conversations, and one could hear what the other is saying, because we were not designed as individuals, not designed to be working. We didn't to be working from home, or to have a different place from the work environment itself. We're not designed. We weren't wired up for that. And then there's a belief that you need extra tools, you need policies, you need trainings, and how to manage your remote team. So some of the beliefs that we're looking at. And then the switch seems to be too big a challenge for some of the organizations that we've seen. So when we start to talk about remote work and we start to looking at when that environment wears off, this is the beyond 2020. This is the norm. You know, we in it already. We understand where it is at this point in time, and we start to look at the degenerating workforce. And I'm just checking for my time. Yeah, we're starting to look at a degenerating work culture. We see that. We see that happen in businesses that we come from. Is that this has worn off. Now there's a culture that we need to be work of. There's distraction and loss of accountability. There's a reduced team bond and trust. You know, people are finding ways to meet, despite the fact that we're probably going to have a resurgence of the pandemic. That people are starting to look at that, how they innovatively start to look at bonding and trusting. And then the issue of psychological wellness, illness that we're talking about. How to sustain that in a remote organization. And then I'm going to run through it. I've got 10 minutes with you. Let me just start to look at, and we start to look at what will be consequences of remote, what will be remote allowed, which is your level 2 that we talk about, and fully remote, which is your level 4, and your hybrid remote, depending the level of comfort you have, the level of engagement you have, and the level of accountability you have. Organizations are subsequently moving from saying no, there's no remote, you've got to be here, and there's this anxiety that exists. But what is the collaboration that needs to look at? And we'll start to look at that a little bit more from a leadership point of view. So what are the 10 critical factors that we look at? I'm not going to run through all 10 of them. I want to just leave some time for some question and answers very quickly. Leadership, as we know, remote teams have become the norm and need clarity and leadership. So there's some of the things that we're looking at there. From a culture perspective, build on our outcome and collaborative culture. You know, we need to include every touch point between your team members and people. We need to look at a phrase that organizations use that says always on culture. It's always on. And culture, as we know, is the way we do things around here. And we start to look at that particular perspective. And then when we start to look at our performance, we start to look at, do we have a clear vision? Do we have set goals and objectives? Do we have regular team meetings? And do we have a motivating team culture that we start to look at? And then when we start to look at our communication and engagement, I think it's critically important in this era. There's the digital chats that we have, the clarity and expectations that we have, our presence in meetings, our facilitation in terms of our communication and so forth. So what does that look like for us? And then I want to touch on the psychological safety in terms of employee wellness and ergonomics, where we transition to remote should be underpinned by trust and psychological safety. So that's the underpinning role that we need to look at. We need to look at the progress from a state of progress away from the state of apathy to anxiety to a state of comfort, that we start to look at this particular and correct remote ergonomics, reduce absenteeism, support optimal job design, and so forth. So there's a whole lot of things that we can do in that particular space. So I want to take you very quickly why we're looking for it. We're fairly priced, we're flexible, we need speed, we need sustainability. That's what ultimately business is looking at. That's what ultimately the jobs of the future will be looking at. So I'm going to skip this slide so that I want to get to one or two of the other aspects that I want to talk about. As you can see, from a South African perspective, we start to look at our discipline, our global, our slowdown, and this is our makeup here that we start to look at that. In the world of work in 2020, if you have a sense of entitlement and appropriate skills, you demand and control. When we start to look at have an appropriate skilled word, and this is the space where we want to be. We want to be in that particular space where we want to be accomplished game changers. We don't want to be in the space in the future of work in 2020, 2030 and beyond, 2020 and beyond, up to 2030 and beyond, whatever the case may be. We don't want to be missing the mark in any way. Some of the skills of the future that we're looking at, as we know, cognitive, creativity, logical reasoning, problem solving, mathematical, your content skills. We start to look at the oral expression, your social, which is your cross-functional skills, social and management skills. We start to look at, those are power skills that we talk about, but then we start to look at your digital skills that one needs to look at. The question is that how are we preparing our workforce of the future in order to engage these particular enablers here, to engage and to become better people managers, better people leaders, better people would solve problem more effectively and so forth. As taken by the country profile in terms of the World Economic Forum, education and skills, as you look at digital skills in the active population, we're looking at 29%. And I want to just go down the issue of tertiary education, the relevance of tertiary education. Only 49% of the tertiary education becomes relevant in that particular space. And then we start to look at your employment and your unemployment perspective. Some of the emerging roles, we're looking at process automation, we're looking at big data analytics and compliance. Some of the emerging roles, critical analysis, systems analysis, emotional intelligence, and some of the roles, as we know, are becoming redundant, is your accounting, bookkeeping, data entry clerks, sales representatives, insurance underwriters, assembly and factory workers. Some of the things that it's not exhaustive, it's very subjective in nature, because the different people have different views of this depending on the type of industry that they come from, but we start to look at that. The top 15 skills, as we know, for 2025, and we'll start to look at your analytical thinking and so forth. So yeah, I think it's quite visible that you can see that. I come from the financial services industry. I thought I'd put in something there. This is what we looked at, that this is what financial institutions are looking at, that our adoption of technology has been cloud computing with 98%. And as we go down, our emerging skills resonate with the ones that I talked about at that particular point in time. So how do you augment, or what's the augmentation between machine and human, if you're looking at it? And this gives you a pretty good sense, guys. They give you a pretty good sense in terms of that you're looking at the type of information that you have there. Almost 70%, 67, 68%, 60% are all physical, manual, communicating, decision-making, coordinating, managing, advising, leading. You can see there's a large human interaction in that particular space when we start to look at that environment. I want to end up with this few slides here, and then we are probably, sorry to, I know we're towards the end of this webinar, almost 5 minutes to go, but just to give you some of the trends that are positively influencing business in 2022. As you can see, increased adoption of technology, advanced mobile, advanced expansion of education, expansion of the middle class, and the decreasing or negatively influencing. So I just chose a few. So it is by no way conclusive, but I just chose a few of the decreasing roles in the health sector, medical labs, as you can see, pharmacy aides, as you can see, dental hygienist, as you can see. If that's decreasing, then what will be the increasing roles? And then we start to look at health, online diagnosis, care bots, cobot surgeons, wellness mentors, some of the stuff that we're looking at in that particular space. In the energy and oil, these are all available in the NEDLAC study. There's a NEDLAC document out, which I reference in this particular webinar, and I reference other aspects of this particular webinar, just to give you a sense of where we're heading, and you can make sense of it based on the organizations that you come from. So if that's the decreasing roles, as we can see, the power plant, we start to look at mapping technicians. What are then the increasing roles? Is the solar technicians. So are we prepared for these particular roles? Are we reskilling the people? Are we energizing them to start taking on a new? So incubators, institutions such as UEL, in terms of its short learning programs that can be customized for you guys. We start to look at mainstream university. One of the best in the research domain in the world is UKZN, and climbing up the rank, which I'm proud to be an alma mater of, or is my alma mater. So it's all of those things that actually energize me to speak about it very, very passionately. In the transport sector, we start to look at taxi and bus drivers. We start to look at all of these particular aspects. And then what are the increasing roles? As we can see, data analyst, supply chain logistics specialists, drone operators, VR training, the multimedia digital space that we start to look at. In the public sector, these are the stuff that we need to look at, and what are those, and what are the order clerks, and what are the increasing roles, and those are the subsequently the increasing roles that we're looking at. And I can go on into the services sector, exactly the same aspects that we're looking at, just to give you a high level view. In education, I was very amused with this particular aspect. Mediocre teachers. I hope I don't fall in that particular bracket, but if I do, it'll be a learning exercise for me to move up and start to be more apt in the way I produce and do things. And what will that look like? Designers of learning, specialist needs, and so forth. In the financial services sector, and this is my passion, this is where I come from, I look at this very clearly, and then I start to build capacity in that particular space going forward. Change at speed, work with purpose, permanent flexibility, have a platform for talent, and digital from inside out. Those are my references. Those are the people that you need to contact. And from a UEL perspective, phenomenal people to deal with, people that can engage you. And I'm sure that will be the end. I'm sorry, this is just giving you a teaser, giving you an idea of what UKZ and what UKZ and UEL can do, and how we can be of assistance to you guys, so that we can start adding value in the spaces that you come from. And yeah, with those few words, thank you very much for listening for me. I enjoyed chatting to you. Thank you.
Thanks, Prof. I think now is our time. We'll take a few questions. So if you do have a question, you're welcome to raise your hand and you can ask your question live, or you can type something in the Q&A box. I have a question from earlier on in your presentation from Africa. The 4R has become such a buzzword, meaning so many things to different people. Humanity now seems to be a bystander at the mercy of technology. The question is, how do you explain the dichotomy of technological determinism versus social constructionism?
I think it's very simply put, I think it's the concept of continuous learning. I think that we must not view technology as a hindrance. We must not as competition to us. I think we must embrace technology as an enabler to us from a social perspective, from a perspective of business. I think we need to start looking at how technology can add value. I know there is this buzzword, and I'm trying to look at, because we must understand only 8 to 10%, only 8 to 10% build the technology, 8 to 10% build the technology. 90% of them use the technology. So what is it telling us? It is telling us that we are moving into a service economy. And the service economy is that how do we use the technology to the benefit rather than it being an obstructionist view from our perspective. So I hope in a very succinct and a short manner, tried to answer that particular question and saying, it is basically that we must use technology as an enabler to the benefit of human beings.
Okay, thanks, Prof. I'm just going to launch our poll in the meantime while we're still looking at the questions and comments. If you are watching on Facebook Live, unfortunately, you won't be able to participate in the poll. I have a question from John. Can we have a copy of the slides? So yes, we will be sending out the slides and access to the video by the end of today. Just in terms of some other comments that have come through, Ian had a long comment there with a reference to another source. If anyone's interested, it went out to everyone. Stan says, great insight, Prof. Thank you. I hope to get a copy of your presentation for future reference. Kaushik Singh says, greetings. Is this presentation for reference available for reference? I don't know, Prof. Would they have to access the actual reference?
Yeah. So this is in the public domain. So what I have done is brought it all together for you guys and brought you the different views from different thought leaders. Yeah, it can be referenced, but But if you're looking at referencing this document, I would suggest that you go to the source document to read up first before you start to make your own analysis. But yes, you can reference them at some point. Yeah.
Okay. Mohammed says, first class presentation. We are blessed and fortunate to have you, Prof. Sagering says, thanks, Prof. Very informative webinar. Sean says, thank you, Prof, for taking us on the journey and providing a great summary of this complex topic. Koshek says, thank you for this very enriching presentation. Zama says, mental health and wellness must be made a priority and integrated into our everyday lives. Namonde says, I enjoyed the session, very informative. Thank you, Prof. Onisiwe, thank you so much, Prof. Rose, excellent, thank you. Tuladu says, will we be getting the recording of the presentation? I joined in late, so that we will have the presentation on our website for a period of time. So if you did RSVP and get this reminder, you will also receive the link to the presentation. Otherwise, you can just check our website at the end of the day. Hope says, thanks. Lauren says, excellent topic, well done, Prof. Zama has a question. What could be some of the well-being indicators that we need to look out for?
Yeah, I think that's safe to say that I don't want to venture into that particular area because I'm not a psychologist or some sort of medical practitioner. But some of the things that you need to look at is behaviorally. You know, so you seem to have known a particular individual in a work setting, and somewhat this behavior had subsequently taken a 360 degree. And the other thing that you need to look at is the engagement in some of the sessions that you have remotely. So some of the things that organizations do that I know do it very effectively. That when you start off a meeting, they ask everybody to put the videos on so that they can see you, they can engage you, to see your mood, to see how well you engage, to see where you're sitting, and show them around. And people play some games virtually as well. And you, from that, you can gauge whether individuals are engaged or not, or whether individuals have something that they're carrying with them. I think those are some of the triggers that we look at. And constant and absenteeism. You know, you're at home, but you're absent, or you at the meeting, but you're still absent. And that's triggers you can pick out because you've been involved in engaging that particular individual for a long time. And like I said, it's a very generic answer. I'm not in the medical field, so maybe a psychologist in this webinar can help us with that. Thanks.
Okay, and then we've got one more question, a few more comments. So I think we're going to finish off with that. Africa says, great presentation. Zandile, insightful. Thank you for sharing, Prof. Zenzele, thanks, Prof. What an honor to be part of your presentation. Reminded me of the time when you lectured us on strategy at UKZN. And Prinaveen says, thank you, Prof. Very informative. Enjoyed it. Well done. And then our last question is here from Jean. What is more useful, data science versus or data analytics?
It's data analytics, and they call them data scientists. So data analytics. So the analytic part is the fact that you're taking people from a diagnostic to a diagnostic and descriptive space to a very prescriptive and evaluative space. So you diagnose first, and then the data analytics, the analytics of the data, the insight to the data will take you to a prescriptive and to a evaluative mode, which will give you great insight into how to position your organizations going forward. And I might just make a disclaimer. I enjoyed doing this particular webinar simply because I'm not an engineer by profession. I've come from the humanities, so it's important for us to be multidisciplined and start to engage in other faculties, and because often the solution lies in engineering for management or in sciences for arts and stuff like that. So we need to be multidisciplined, and that's what I'm going to be. And that's why I encourage students that I supervise as well to go multidisciplinary and start to look at topics that are very relevant and very much topical for the day.
Okay, thanks so much, Prof. So if anyone does have other questions, when we do send out the link this afternoon, there is an opportunity where you can provide feedback or comments. If you have more questions for Prof, you can type it in there, and we will obviously pass on your queries directly to him. So I'd just like to firstly thank you, Prof, for sharing with us today. A really informative session, and I think, as you can see from the feedback, it was really enjoyed by everyone. Also, thank you to all our attendees for joining us today and engaging in the webinars. As I mentioned, the video and the slides will be available on our website by the end of today, and I'll be sending out that direct link to you once it's ready. So if you enjoyed the sessions that Abdul has done, he also facilitates on all our management and leadership programs, and he specializes on strategic management and human resources. So you can find out about all our management programs by visiting our website at www.ukznextendedlearning.com. So our 2021 portfolio has been released, and that we have decided that due to financial constraints this year, obviously due to COVID, we have frozen our course prices for 2021. But we've also decided to run a promotion for this month of December, where if you register and pay for any course taking place in 2021, you will qualify for a 10% discount of the course price. So if you want to find out more about this promotion and take advantage of it, you can also go to our website at www.ukznextendedlearning.com. Otherwise, we hope that you enjoyed our session today. Stay safe, and we wish you a wonderful festive season ahead.
Thank you very much.